Alright, let's do some more on Film Red. I've had quite a bit of time now to ruminate on the experience. I've also watched a couple of reviews that other people have made, and I don't normally do that with One Piece stuff because I like to keep my opinion kind of clean. But in this case, I was really interested to know what others thought because it's such a polarizing film. And after having this time, there are definitely things I like more about the movie, and there are also things that I like a lot less. One of the things I like a lot less is just how underutilized Brooke was. This didn't immediately pop out to me because in the initial experience, I think Brooke got lost in the glob of straw hats, but this really was his chance to shine. It's a musical, and Brooke is a musical man. I don't want to use the word protagonist, but in a movie so focused on music changing the world, I think that Brooke should have played a more primary role. Even if it's just stuff like maybe a short duet with Uta near the beginning, or even a full-on music fight in the middle or towards the end. Maybe Brooke tries to counter Uta's singing by playing music that forces her to go off key, or whatever happens it is when people sing bad. Full disclosure, if it wasn't obvious already, I know nothing about music. It's all just sound sorcery to me. But Brooke is the Straw Hats musician, and not only that, he's a global musical sensation himself. He's the Soul King. So I definitely see this as a missed opportunity. And I forget who it was. I don't know if it was Tekking or Murphy or Randy or whoever. I've watched a lot of reviews. I've watched reviews from channels that have 10 subscribers. I have done the full rounds here. But someone pointed out that when Brooke was stuck on the musical score, he could have just used his soul powers to, pop out and read it. But instead, they decided to go for the panty joke. Because the panty aspect of Brooke gets more screen time than the musical aspect of Brooke in the music-focused movie. In the panty-focused movie, we can do that. One Piece film panty. You know what? That's probably not Brooke's movie either. They'll find a way to just cut it out. But not just Brooke, but there are other musically relevant characters in One Piece that would have been fun to include. I know he's not anywhere near a favorite, in fact, probably quite the opposite, but Scratchman Apu. His entire existence is music mixed in with general dickery. And I would have been just as equally as happy to see him as, say, Charlotte Oven. Thinking back on it though, all of the songs were just Ado. No one else was really allowed to express themselves musically, which makes sense, it's Uta's world. But that's very rare in a musical. In fact, off the top of my head, I can't think of a single other example of a musical where only one person sings every song. I'm sure they're out there, I just can't think of them. But it gives the movie the feel of a jukebox musical. An example of which would be, say, Mamma Mia, which is a musical that's told exclusively by ABBA songs. It's a good show, so is We Will Rock You, American Idiot, and so on and so forth, but they do often feel a little bit cobbled together. They're a good time, but they don't tend to hold up in terms of story. And looking back on Film Red, I love the music, but it definitely feels a bit like Ado the musical featuring One Piece. Not necessarily a bad thing at all. In fact, I think if One Piece had gone full musical, then that definitely would have put a lot of people off. But I do wish that characters who have such profound relationships with music were, one, included, and two, if they were, had something to do. To Uta now, and this is something that my mind has changed on for the better. In my original video and ground line review, I said that her arc suffers from one too many plot twists and external corruption elements like the mushrooms and the music demon. I don't think that so much anymore. I think Uta is fine. And I don't think that traumatized teenage girls should be expected to make the most logically sound decisions. So as presented to us, I completely buy Uta and her actions. However, on the flip side, what I don't buy, what I really want to refund actually, is Shanks. This has been pointed out quite a bit in many other reviews, but I could not agree more because there is no reason why Shanks left Uta on Elegia. No good reason at all, just none. Every thread of logic leads to an unsatisfying dead end. So one thread is that Shanks leaves her there to achieve her dreams of being a global pop star. Hurrah! But how? The island is completely destroyed. There's no resources to further Uta, and there's no one to teach her, aside from Gordon, the guy we just met. And more importantly, there is no contact with the outside world, and pop stars, they need contact. What Shanks did was actively hinder Uta's dream. Were it not for that chance encounter with the Den Mushi washing up one day, which said SSG, we're not going to touch that for now. We don't know how long the SSG has been around, I suppose. But were it not for that chance encounter, she would still be isolated on the island to this very day, probably wallowing in despair because she can't do the thing it is she wants to do. I also can't quite fathom the idea that after experiencing the devastation of Top Musica, Shanks left Uta on the one island where that threat had a chance of being awakened again, especially since Uta had no memory of it initially and so may have just accidentally summoned it again. She could have been taking a walk along the beach, did it as you do. I don't know, I don't go to the beach. But then, there's some music in the sand. What's this? Top Musica? Let me sing it to myself because I'm ever so lonely. Da da da, and then destruction. That's all it would have taken. If Uta is literally anywhere else in the world, then Top Musica could never have been awakened again. It is just the worst possible decision, and not made by the traumatized teenage girl. It's made by the allegedly mature sound of mind adult. I say allegedly because it's Shanks, he's a bit of a rat bag. But there's also the idea that Shanks left Uta there to protect her from knowing the truth, so that he could take on the role of the villain and preserve her general innocence. But here's a hypothetical question. Which one of these would you prefer? Would you prefer to know that you accidentally killed thousands of people whilst being under the control of an evil music demon? Or, and just hear me out, would you prefer to think that your father intentionally murdered those thousands of people, never loved you, and abandoned you at the first opportunity he could? They're both not great options, but the first I do think is significantly better. Especially because what Uta needs more than anything else right here is comfort and guidance. I completely get Uta. The events as presented in this film are messed up, and it makes me actively dislike Shanks, like in context of film Red, not the actual series that is. But that's weird because the film also tries to make him the hero at the end. Uta is my daughter and such, but everything is his fault. He left his daughter swimming in a sea of corpses with a dude they just met and made Uta think that her father was a cold-blooded murderer. And then there's Gordon. The excuse for why he didn't destroy Top Musica, it's pretty pathetic. I couldn't bring myself to do it because I am a lover of the musics. Mate, that music's just killed everyone you know and love. And it would do it again if it could. In fact, it could. It almost did. Because of you, Gordon. And it's so easily fixable as well from a narrative standpoint. Say in a flashback, Gordon burns Tot Musica, but then years later, it magically reappears and finds its way to Uta. Because it's a magic music demon, anything can happen. But at the very least, it would make Gordon look like he actually tried. And also, then keeping Uta on the island wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing in the world. It would still be pretty close. But at least they thought that Tot Musica was destroyed and had no chance of resurfacing. I've also heard that Shanks didn't take Uta because, oh no, they'd have the Marines chasing them, which to me is kind of like Luffy being worried about taking Robin back from any slobby because, oh no, I don't want Marines chasing me. Oh no. To be fair, I imagine the logic here is that if the Marines discover that Uta is a pirate, then that's going to make her notorious, and so she can no longer be a pop star. So naturally, our only course of action is to leave her on the isolated corpsey island. I get it though, she does need to leave the crew at some stage, but this is the exact worst time and an even worse place to do it. At the very least, leave her on the Goat Kingdom with Luffy and all of the other abandoned children. And the more I think about it, the more my mind doubles down on the idea that I really would have loved it if Uta was the one who wrote Tot Musica. Like say Shanks did abandon her on the island, and Uta grows up in their musical society hating her father and hating pirates for doing all of the abandonment, and maybe also being an outcast because of her music powers, Harry Potter style. But eventually connecting by distance to her future fans around the world. And then Uta resolves to change the world and begins work on her ultimate piece, Tot Musica, which was intended to be the savior, but through Uta's arc gets corrupted into the destroyer it ends up being. Or something like that, I don't know. What I know is that this aspect of the movie was extremely unsatisfying to me. I do feel for the writers though, because look, this must have been next to impossible, because the reality is, it's a One Piece movie and we can't go too dark with it. Uta needs to be both the antagonist and also somehow completely innocent. So what we end up with are a series of weak plot points to service that desired composition of Uta. In general though, making One Piece movies in this era is hard. It is very hard. Back in the day, it was much easier. You could tell isolated stories on isolated islands. Nothing major needs to happen. It's just a good old fun, pirate fun. Yo. But One Piece as a story has just become too big. And to justify a movie, you need to escalate things. You can't go backwards. Which is why every movie now has these massive world-ending stakes. Whether that's trapping everyone in a dream world or destroying the world with the endpoints. The endpoints. I love Film Z. I hate the endpoints. Or having Douglas Bullet versus the One Piece universe in Stampede. Everything needs to be up here. You know what? Even up here. That's where it needs to be. I also think that One Piece is an old product trying its best to keep up in a new era. You can see this clearly with the anime, which still follows the exact same business model as it did when it began in 1999. Meanwhile, modern shonen anime has long since moved forward from that model of one episode a week all year round and is now favoring seasonal structures. And the same thing is happening with films. Like we've entered this interesting era of canon films like Demon Slayer, Infinity Train, and Jujutsu Kaisen Zero. Those films are essential experiences to their respective series because they actually further the story. In the case of Jujutsu Kaisen, they further it by going backwards, but they still further it. Whereas One Piece is still stuck in the space of needing to make non-canon films. So what they need to do to keep up with this brand new funky trend thing is kind of flirt with canon, which is what Film Red is. It sells itself on Shanks rather than what the movie actually is, which is Uta. And to the film's eternal credit, that paid off big time. From a marketing perspective, I think it is phenomenal. It is such a good case study. And it's actually kind of like making YouTube thumbnails. You want to make it as appealing as possible to click, even if the core of the content focuses more on something that's not that thing. That's exactly what Film Red is. It is Shanks clickbait, and I respect that. I do think if it was called One Piece Film Uta, then it probably does about as well as Gold and Stampede, which to be clear was nothing special. It was an anime movie. They were anime movies. Maybe Film Uta does slightly better. Maybe it does slightly worse. And I'd also like to say that I did legitimately enjoy the film. There's a lot of little things I didn't like and a lot of things that kind of make me go, it falls apart a bit too easily, but it was still really fun. And I think it is possible to both enjoy something and highlight its weaknesses. So speaking of, here are some more weaknesses to highlight. I think the film itself is a bit clunky as a film. The way that characters appear from a perspective of cinematography is often incredibly jarring, just like suddenly having Bartolomeo on stage, then suddenly having Charlos there. They're there now. A lot of the time it made me feel like I had Katakuri's future sight and was just skipping 10 seconds ahead in the film. They're very minor moments, but they happen everywhere. In fact, even the first shot of the Straw Hats is pretty incredibly weirdly underwhelming. It's just like, cut to meat on a stick, and there's Luffy, and the other Straw Hats are there as well, I guess. It doesn't really matter. The movie treats them like it doesn't matter. It's just not a very well-constructed introduction to our protagonists, which isn't to say that they always need big, flashy intros like what happened in Film Gold, but I actually think that Film Z nailed it best. The Straw Hat introduction there is extremely casual, yet still very visually engaging. The crew are just chilling on the sunny, doing their own thing, but what makes it interesting is the shot composition, the camera movements, and the emphasis on small details. It is probably legitimately the best scene in all of One Piece if you need to give someone like a 60-second TLDR on the Straw Hats, because through this incredibly brief scene, you understand their personalities, their dynamics, and their desires. And it's done almost entirely just through visual storytelling. Film Red feels like it lacks that care to me, in much the same way that Stampede did. I think there are also some minor setup and payoff issues. Generally when you set something up, you're seeding it in the minds of your audience to pay off down the line. But in Film Red, we just go set up and then immediate payoff. There's no seeding. Like Luffy and Uta having their eating contest, immediately crossing into a flashback of them doing the same thing as children. I think that definitely would have benefited from a couple of scenes to breathe between those two, so that when it does happen, the audience can go, it's the thing is happening, I've seen that before. And then at the end of the film, Luffy notices his drawing on Uta, which then immediately activates a flashback of how that happened. Which, come to think of it, is the exact opposite actually. That's actually payoff, followed by the setup that should have already happened. So we get the payoff, and then retroactively we insert the setup for the payoff. What I'm trying to say is that drawing moment should have happened in one of the initial flashbacks. That way, when Luffy finally does see it, as does the audience, we have the same realization as Luffy. We go, that's the thing. Instead of going, what's that? And then having the thing explained to us at the climax of the film. To be fair, maybe it was seeded earlier and I just missed it. I don't catch everything. All I know is I got to the end and I was like, you're introducing this idea now? This feels real late, movie. Real late. Also, to be clear, you can rip apart any One Piece film like this. Literally all of them. None of them is safe. I'm just focusing on Film Red because it's the latest thing, but all of the One Piece films are intrinsically flawed in their own fun and unique ways. I mean, even Film Z, for example, the one that I always say is the best one, it has some glaring plot holes, such as the idea that one of Zephyr's big issues is that he's just too much of an old man to fight properly. The way he used to back in the good old days. And yet his second in command is someone who literally has the ability to revert people's ages. So why didn't we just do that, movie? Then he would be in his prime, then he would be stronger than Kizaru, then he would have no problems. And the answer is that, it's a One Piece movie. They are what they are. Enjoyable nonsense that we really shouldn't think too hard about, but I am anyway because I just didn't have anything better to do.